And a very good evening to you, and welcome to this evening's edition of Politics 101. It's Friday night. It's Friday night. Good evening to you if you're joining us from Guyana, if you are joining us from our Caribbean. And as you know what we say on this program, the Caribbean has never been an island construct. The Caribbean has always been a regional construct. So we are part of the Caribbean. Don't let anybody tell you all otherwise, and you all don't have to quarrel for it. As CLR James, we're gonna do something on CLR James one of these days, because what I'm trying to do is to introduce our audience to some new ways and new perspectives and new thinkers and so on. CLR James, if I were to paraphrase him, would ask, what do they know of the Caribbean who only the Caribbean knows? Of course, he was that famous statement he made on cricket. What do they know of cricket who only cricket knows? Our Caribbean, good evening to you, whether you're in Trinidad and Tobago, whether you're in Barbados or Antigua, St. Lucia, Grenada, Montserrat, wherever you are, welcome to Politics 101. And some people out there in the quote-unquote U.S. Virgin Islands, and they want me to say quote-unquote because the U.S. Virgin Islands are very much Caribbean. Hello to Mr. Benjamin out there in the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and I remember the first time I went to St. Croix, I thought I was in Guyana, flat like Guyana. So those of you out there in the Virgin Islands, the other Virgin Islands, what they call the British Virgin Islands, welcome to you all. And if I don't call you, it's not because I forget. One of the things about the Caribbean, when you study the Caribbean, teach the Caribbean, you're talking about studying 36 different countries. And some may argue they're a little bit more than that. I'm teaching this semester a course on Introduction to the African Diaspora. And of course, when we get to do the Caribbean part of the African diaspora, it's always a little bit more challenging, because you're talking about the French Caribbean, Francophone Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, Anglophone Caribbean, and the Lusophone Caribbean, and so on and so on and so forth, Because of colonialism, we have these different parts of the Caribbean. That's always a challenge, but it's always a joy, because it's such a wonderful place. CLR James used to say, what we have in the Caribbean is a 17th century economy and a 20th century people. He was so great thinker, CLR James. Good evening to you in the Caribbean. To those of you who are joining us from Europe, good morning. It's just past midnight. Good night to you, troopers there, and how you all do it, I don't know, because it's 12 o'clock now, and by the time you all get to Sherry Duncan, it's 1 o'clock, and by the time you all get to Mark Ben's Cup, it's 2 o'clock. By the time Mark done, it's 2, 3 in the morning, and yet people from out there tune in to these programs. Welcome to you all joining us from England, and those of you who are joining us from France. I know some of you from France. Good evening. And I am never going to forget our brothers and sisters in Paramaribo. And when we Guyanese say old-time Guyanese, when we say Paramaribo, we mean Suriname. And when we say Cayenne, we mean French Guyana. Welcome to all of you. How about my friends in West Berbice? Good evening. Tonight we're going to be talking Venezuela. And, night before the last, we had Aubrey Norton on. And thanks to you all for all the feedback you all sent in on that program. Aubrey was on, and he dealt at length with the political partisan perspective on the Venezuelan issue. And I did promise last week that I was going to broaden the coverage by bringing different perspectives on the Venezuelan issue. And I am true to my word tonight, as I've been advertising. Dr. Mark Kirton is here, backstage and ready to roll. So we are going to be talking with a Latin American expert, not an expert from Latin America, a Guyanese Latin American expert, I mean, someone who has studied and has a good grasp of the political motions of South America, Central America, and so forth, Latin America in general. So he's here, and please share the link. Please share the link. I know it's Saturday night, Friday night. Sorry, we normally on Friday night it's Dr. Vince Adams. So you Vince Adams fans, Dr. Adams is going to be back next week Friday, and we are going to be talking Venezuela with Kirton. Tell you what I'll do. I'll give you all a couple of minutes to get yourself together, get settled, because we're going to be having some real serious discussion tonight. We're going to let the popular artist speak for us for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back with Dr. Mark Kirton. You know, some people say that our national anthem, our popular culture national anthem, it burns inside by Johnny Braff. Well, the old timers used to say that. Well, this is another of our national anthems in song. Dave Martin.
Take this song out. We're a peaceful people, struggling with struggle. I mean, I look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside places, from foreign places, talk about taking over, being backing down. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river. That belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. And we love the open country of the roof and and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Don't be criticizing. This is a home, we love it, and we mean to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river. That belongs to we. Not no one to sake, not one rice bread, not one chorus, not a blade of grass, not one golden apple, not one jamun, not a drop of water from the Pomeroon, not one breadfruit, not one white tea, not one guinea, not one lime tree, not a one sapodilla, not one Caroline, not one sugar cane, or a dry of lime, not one sherriga, not one cracate, not one guinea, not one blue sake, not one rice bread. Venezuela, all yours, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now. We're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we're moving from here. Make no mistake. So we ain't giving up the mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, and we ain't giving up the river that belongs to we. Not the one blue sake, not the one rice grain, one for us. Not a blade of grass. Every time we sing this song to our Guyanese audience, a chorus does break out. And here is your chorus to break out. All your turn to sing. You don't come here to sit down and listen, you come here to sing. 1, 2, 1, 2. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. No, we ain't giving up. All right. We ain't giving up no river. That belongs to we. Not the one blue sake. Not the one rice bread. Not one for us. One more time. Not a blade of grass. Let me hear you. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. Yes. No, we ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up no river. That belongs to we. Not the one blue sake. Now we ain't giving up no mountain. Now we ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up no river. That belongs to we. Not the one blue sake. Not the one rice bread. Not one for us. Not a bit of grass.
Ah, yes. Venezuela, all you ask. Our national treasure there, Dave Martin. And you all hear the Guyanese contribution to the art form, that genre of music, calypso music, the mother music of the English-speaking Caribbean, a wham pam pam, and a whap pam pam. That's the Guyanese version. All the different countries in the Caribbean, you see the calypso thing is all a wee thing. Trinidad, of course, we acknowledge is the center where it grew fastest. But each Caribbean territory brings to the calypso something. The Bajans bring something, well, you all know that. And if you listen, the Antiguans, they bring and it's, and even when you listen to Byron Lee and the Jamaicans who used to play calypso before the 1950s when reggae emerged, ska emerged in the 1950s. But before that, Jamaica was in the forefront of calypso music. In fact, reggae itself borrows a little bit of calypso and so on and so forth. But we bring that whap up story to the calypso. Good evening to all of you. Not a blade of grass. Yes, Lynette, not a blade of grass. Prince, good evening. Good evening, Marcia Fordyce. Desiree Hunter. Welcome to Politics 101 tonight. Gloria Pod is always with us here, always urging us on with very, very informative comments. Tonight, we are going to kick it off with Venezuela, and we are introducing a new guest. And as I always say to you all, when we have new guests, behave yourself. Behave yourself. Kennedy Florent, my brother from Maryland, welcome. Good evening. Good evening. Your clock turned back in that part of the America. So what is now what? Just after 6. Just after 6 out there in the east coast of the United States of America. Kwesi, good night to you, wherever you are. Good evening to you, Esther. So we are having Dr. Courtney for the first time on Politics 101, and you all are very ideological. You all are very picky, and you all are very exact, and you all are very knowledgeable. But behave yourself, because when you see you have new people to the family, you want to welcome in the best way. Let's bring Dr. Kirton on to Politics 101 for the first time. Dr. Mark Kirton, good evening to you, my brother.
Thank you so very much, and good evening to you, your viewers and listeners. It is indeed a distinct pleasure to make my debut, in a sense, on your program, and I've been looking at some of them, very instructive, very educative, as they say sometimes.
Yes.
And I'm happy to see that you are moving in the direction of where many stations ought to go. That is to sensitize the Guyanese people and the diaspora and others in relation to the Venezuela-Guyana border issue. So thanks for having me. I'm appreciative of that, for that invitation.
And thank you. And we scholars sometimes are put in a funny position, whether we are speaking as scholars, whether we are speaking as nationalists, whether we are speaking as citizens. Sometimes we have to wear all these hats. I remember you called me on an issue a couple of years ago. You say, David, this is Mark talking to you, man to man. Mark talking to David, your friend. David talking to Mark. Tonight, Mark, I can't help but to say that I want you to speak both as a scholar, but also as a Guyanese, because this Venezuelan issue is much more than meets the eye. Let me pose my first question to you, and that is, why should we on a Friday night be spending an hour and more talking about Venezuela and what is coming out of Venezuela as Guyanese? Why should we be spending our Friday night talking about that?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I would say that every night now, we have to look at what is an unprecedented level of aggression being demonstrated by the Venezuelan government. And I think that it's important to sensitize our people in relation to that issue. And I believe also that we ourselves, as Guyanese, need to keep abreast of what is taking place, some of the propaganda, some of the PR that is coming out of Venezuela. And I think that we need to counter that by ensuring that our people are aware, informed of the trajectory which we see Venezuela moving into in relation to this issue. Now, I think one could argue that over the years, and I don't want to sound political, but to go back to the 1970s and 80s, everybody was singing Not a Blade of Grass. As a matter of fact, some people are saying that now we're singing Do We Want With We. But I mean, it is, to my mind, important to go back to that era when we saw every citizen being fully educated on the issue, from primary, even some people tell me kindergarten, the children were singing Not a Blade of Grass in the 70s and 80s. And we had everybody on board, in a sense, transcending political, ethnic, and other lines. And I think we have to get back there, because this is the most important national issue which has to be confronted as a people. And I don't think we have time to have the differences which turn up every time some issues such as this are, emerge in contemporary times. So I think we have to take a step back, look at what took place in the 70s and 80s, at the height of the aggression being demonstrated by Venezuela, and the resilience shown by the Guyanese people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirton. And I do remember 1982, which was the end of the 12-year sort of truce in hostilities. Well, not truce in hostilities, because there was never hostility from Guyana. But when there was a pause by Venezuelan hostility, something that was brokered by Dr. Eric Williams, the late Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And in 1982, that pause came to an end. And I remember the president of Venezuela at that time immediately upping the ante, because, of course, they did not renew that truce. And I remember being very much part of a political party at that time, which was very hostile to the government of the day. But I remember Dave Martin's Not a Blade of Grass, filling the airwaves and the byways and the roadways and so forth. And I do remember at that time that even fierce fierce competitors against each other in the partisan political sphere, really wrapping our minds and our solidarity around this issue. Let me allow you to put this thing in historical context, because
Yes.
part of what
Thank
we're
you.
dealing with is history.
Sure.
Because to understand what Venezuela is going today, and to put it in its context, we have to bring to the fore the historical context. Walk us through the historical development of this issue.
Right. Remember in the 1800s, as a matter of fact, the Monroe Doctrine, the issues related to the Western Hemisphere idea, which was popular in the U.S., the whole issue of the sphere of influence, all of those were the 1800s, which impacted the relations between the U.S. and countries in the hemisphere. By the 1890s, when there was concern about the borders being demarcated across Latin America and in particular South America, we saw where in 1897, the Treaty of Washington, there was the establishment of a tribunal. And in 1899, after the tribunal sat, there was what was termed a full, final, and perfect agreement in relation to the demarcation of the boundaries between then British Guyana, a colony of Great Britain, and Venezuela, a larger state. Now, one could look at it also in that period when other boundaries were being demarcated. In 1904, after arbitration, the boundaries between Guyana and Brazil were demarcated. And since that time, Brazil has recognized the sanctity of juridically defined borders. So we look at the difference, because even Brazil itself in the 1930s worked with Great Britain and Venezuela to demarcate the so-called trijunction area where Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela meet. And there was no difference, there was no concern raised about any issues of the borders not being sanctioned or the sanctity of borders being changed. But I think that one has to look at it by the 1960s in the context of the changing global and regional environment. 1960s, John F. Kennedy, the anti-communist hysteria. One has to look back in 1959, the Cuban Revolution, concerns raised about the communist threat in the region. 1960s also, we saw where Guyana, under Cheddi Jagan, a self-avowed Marxist, and the movement towards independence had some impact on the thinking and the U.S. foreign policy making in relation to the Caribbean and to British Guyana. So we saw that kind of concern, and I believe that there was some influence of the United States in Venezuela, the Betancourt regime, that actually went to the United Nations in 1962 and talked about a border issue that had been finally settled decades before, more than 60 years before, and talking about a fraudulent kind of demarcation of the border. A letter by a junior counsel, which was posthumously opened, along with the kind of pressure, I believe, from the United States at the time, in the height of this beginning of the Cold War and this anti-communist hysteria, moved to the United Nations. And we saw where that moved forward, because by 1966, on the cusp of our independence, we had to move to the Geneva Agreement, which attempted to put some form of structure to this furious Venezuelan claim, and to ensure that there was a period in which 4 years, in which a mixed commission was established to see the extent to which there could be some form of movement towards a settlement. Now, that did not work. And here we see by 1970, as you mentioned it again, with Dr. Eric Williams, and one has to look at that context too, because by 1970, I looked at some literature, and I found that Dr. Williams was already talking about the potential for Venezuelan expansionism in the Caribbean. And that is also, and his concern and the brokering of that 12-year freeze on the border issue, looking for some form of settlement, did not work. So by 1982, when there was an attempt to revive or to sign on to a continuation, I think it was then President Herrera Campins of Venezuela who decided that they were not going to renew that protocol of Port of Spain, as it was known. But one has to also, as I say, look back a little bit, because in that intervening period between 1966, when you got independence, and 1982, in 1966, Venezuela moved to occupy Ancocco Island, or half of Ancocco Island, which under the Treaty of 1899, under the Arbitral Award, was Guyana's. And they still maintain control over that and the entire Ancocco Island up to today. So one has to look at it also in the context of, a historical movement, a series of aggressive acts against Guyana, even in the 60s, just after we became independent, with a small state, newly independent, just feeling its way in a new international and geopolitical environment in this hemisphere, had to be looking for new friends. You remember the start in the 60s and early 70s, Guyana's moved to look to ensure that countries like Brazil would develop strong relations with that country in order for it to serve as a potential counterweight to Venezuelan aggression. We have to remember too that in that period, the movement to non-alignment by Guyana to ensure that the non-aligned movement also was acutely aware of Guyana's concerns for sovereignty and territorial integrity. One has to understand by 1972, Guyana played a leading role in removing the isolation of Cuba. 1972, this was Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica, all in the context of the height of the Cold War and in the height of a strong claim on Guyana. So I think we have to look at the context in which Guyana was operating as a newly independent state, and its first test, its first challenge was, after independence, border questions, border challenges. Remember the issue of the New River Triangle.
Yes.
With Suriname. We had Venezuela. And also, one could argue, the threat from the Atlantic in our sea defense. So that the only state, or only neighbor with which we had no issue was Brazil. So it was not, I think, by chance that the powers that be at the time, the thinkers, Ashley Jackson and Ramphal, and that cadre of strong thinking diplomatic experts, were moving to ensure that we looked at the concentric circles of international relations, first ensuring that our neighbors, especially our strong neighbor Brazil, was fully au fait with our issues. The second was the hemisphere, and the third concentric ring was the international community looking at the movements, the associate organizations, the UN, United Nations, the non-aligned movement, and African brothers and sisters who, at that time, remember by 1974 and 75, Ghana was strongly linked to the struggles in Southern Africa. As a matter of fact, Ghana allowed Cuban planes to land here in 1975 to refuel and on their way to that struggle for Angolan independence. And we had all kinds of issues in relation to that, I think, a very bold move in our foreign policy, because we saw several efforts at reversing that trend towards, a very important contribution to a very important struggle in Southern Africa. So we have to understand that period. We were looking to ensure that we could develop the kind of interaction on many fronts. First, on our border, ensuring that we had South American support from Brazil. We guided, in some ways, the movement towards normalization of relations and the establishment of formal diplomatic relations with Cuba. Remember 1976. We cannot forget CU 455, the bombing, the first act of international terrorism in the Caribbean, where our people, our young scholars, lost their lives. So that period, but not only borders, but the bold kind of foreign policy initiatives which were coming out of Guyana, saw that we faced many challenges, and the border was only one of those. But as we go back to the specific issue of the Venezuela-Guyana border.
And before, hold your thought there, because I think what you just did there was so instructive, and I notice our audience are really caught up in it. Because we have talked about Guyana's, what we call progressive foreign policy during that period. But this is the first time I'm having someone who is coming at it from the perspective of our conflict with Venezuela on the border issue. So IVMAS Guyana is engaging in all these spheres of international relations, African liberation, hemispheric affairs, the non-aligned movement, the OAS, where Venezuela sought to prevent us from joining the OAS, and that all that foreign policy of the early 1970s by the then PNC government had also to do with broadening our scope of friends internationally as a defense against this aggression by Venezuela. And I think that reading of the foreign policy at that time is very important for today, because today, in a sense, we are faced with the mother of all aggressions from the Venezuelans. They've gone for this here. And we have to talk about how we defend ourselves. So I am very glad for that framing of the foreign policy of that time, beyond just normal foreign policy, but with particular objectives, one of which was to broaden our scope of friendship with other countries around the world as a form of defense against aggression.
I think it was important to put it in that kind of frame, in the sense that not only did we move towards ensuring a broadening of the level of support and alliance, we recognized very early that diplomacy was the first line of defense. We had a very small army, not in any way that could, in a sense, battle militarily with Venezuela. We even signed on to the Treaty for Amazonian Cooperation in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
The first time that Brazil had led a multilateral kind of institutional engagement in South America. And we were the first and only CARICOM state. And given our geographical location, We signed on as a member, as a signatory to the Treaty for Amazonian Cooperation, another element in our movement to ensure that we can get the broader support. At that time, our effort to join the OAS was stymied. We didn't get to join the OAS until 1992.
Yeah.
So we had to look at other avenues for ensuring that we had that hemispheric, or we had a voice in the hemispheric fora. And we started with, indeed, the Treaty for Amazonian Cooperation, which subsequently became the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. So I think it is clear that there was that thinking, that as a small post-independent state, we had to do all of those things. We had to look at CARICOM. 1973 was the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas. We were upfront in that approach and ensuring that at the time there was unanimous support for Guyana's, for the territorial integrity and the sanctity of our borders and the sovereignty of a small small state in this large geopolitical environment, so that we developed friends and as they say, influenced people at that time based on the correctness of our position in relation to our borders and the sanctity of our borders.
Dr. Kirton, we have heard several generations of Guyanese have heard about the rich nature of the Venezuelan, the Essequibo section of our country, rich in minerals, gold, diamond, etc. And that is why it was important that we hold on to our territory, and that is why the Venezuelans, in part, wanted to get hold of that territory. Well, here we are in 2023 with what was then dreams and speculations, now the truth. We are now a petro state. We are now a state where the largest deposits of oil in recent times have been found. 2023, Venezuela raising its head in a really vicious way. Does it? Am I correct in summarizing and concluding that it has to do with that newfound oil wealth?
I would say that it is indeed part of the issue.
Okay.
And as in international relations, we have to look at some levels of analysis.
Wonderful.
And the issue of the global environment, what is happening in states, and at the individual level. So that in some levels of analysis, I would say, in the first instance, the changing global environment, the movement to ensure that oil, indeed, and resource acquisition is maintained, especially by the US, is an issue that one has to consider. And I believe that the presence of oil and the potential benefits, which, and that's on the side, which have not necessarily yet started to accrue to the benefit of our people, but I hope it starts soon. I would say that we can see that resource as one of the reasons for this unprecedented action and aggression by Venezuela. Now, I would say also that when you look at the next level, or the other level of analysis of what is going on in the state of Venezuela, where there's a crisis, an economic crisis, there's a political crisis, and a social crisis, and where you see that there's I think that one has to look at it in the context of a move to ensure a rebirth of a high level of patriotism among the Venezuelan people, and therefore they have been conditioned over the years. At school, you see zona de reclamation. You saw all kinds of arguments being advanced from early that this region is theirs. So I think that it's also an effort to rekindle that level of patriotism which seemed to be lost. And at the individual level, I think Mr. Chavez is recognizing that there's a reduction in popularity.
You mean Mr. Maduro?
Sorry, Mr. Oh Lord, I said Mr. Chavez.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chavez, Mr. Chavez's heir.
Yes.
Mr. Maduro is recognizing a reduction in popularity, and therefore the need to kind of win the support of the people again. So that I think it's a combination of factors which have brought this kind of aggressive approach, unprecedented and concerning. And last night I saw an interview with Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president of Venezuela, which is significantly worrying and of concern for people like myself. She talked about, moving in, that this issue here of the referendum is one in which they're not yielding any kind of space. I'm just paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact word. But when you look at the context and coming from a high-level policymaker, I think the powers that be and the analysts in Guyana have to unpack that kind of interview, assess it from all the angles, and ensure that we can really look for serious rebuttal to that, because we're losing the propaganda war in the first place. And we see this talk about direct to the recent bid for the oil bid. The one that what's it called, those young ladies from Guyana who
yes,
also
the oil blocks, yes.
for a block, yes. So they talk directly to this resourcing arrangement, where they see it as theirs, a very spurious kind of claim, and we see fabrications emerging. So I would say that there's a combination of factors to answer.
Of factors that have led us here. No,
but I think the most important is the oil, the resource acquisition, and the potential benefits which can accrue to a small state like Guyana.
Right.
And the bullyism one could say that has emerged.
Let's go to a place here, Mark, and bearing in mind we're not talking party politics here. We're talking a national issue. Surely we have a government, and any response to what's happening here has to be led by the government, but other political and social forces in the country, I would say, are duty bound to lend as much support to the national response. Here is my question. What have we done that needs to be done? And what have we not done that needs to be done like yesterday? So first of all, what have we done that is commendable? And then what have we not done that we should have been doing since yesterday?
David, I see a few things just recently. I say first, the fact that we've had some intervention, some interface, some discussion between government and opposition is a good start. However, I think we have to go beyond that. We have to have active engagement, day-to-day engagement on this issue, and with all the stakeholders. But what I've seen, unfortunately, over the last couple of years is what I term transactional diplomacy, short-term, without a grand strategy, without a framework, a foreign policy framework that is recognizable and could be, shared with the people. That is not present, unfortunately. So we have done the first move. That is to have talks. Now, there's some recommendations which have come from, which are out there, and I'm happy to hear just yesterday that one of my pet peeves is being addressed, and that is the establishment of a more robust relationship with Brazil. I read last evening that President Ali and President Lula met remotely, and while not privy to any of the discussions, one would hope that that is now the beginning and of a relationship that, or the continuation, or the rekindling, or the re-engineering of a relationship that could see Brazil as a strong counterweight to any aggression. And that must have, I believe, the national engagement, national involvement. We have to have that type of engagement. Now, I also saw where Nicaragua has made a statement in support of Venezuela. And other countries, I understand, in Central America are likely to do so at this stage. Now, we have not had that kind of broad engagement with those countries as yet. And I believe that there must be some talk and action involving the opposition with the appointment of special envoys, for example, to go to capitals, to really put our side, our position, the national position on those issues. So you ask, I kind of conflating what has been done.
Yes. Go right ahead.
What ought to be done. But I haven't seen yet very strong movement to ensure that, one, our people are kept informed at almost a daily basis on the issue. Because without that information, there's conjecture, there's misinformation, and there's misinterpretation. So I think, to look at what we haven't done, we have not yet fully briefed our people. Now, I went to the forum of the University of Guyana as a guest, as a member of the audience, and I heard Mr. Kirton indicate that the public relations campaign has begun. And when questioned a little bit more, he talked about the presence of bumper stickers. Now, we have to go beyond the bumper sticker approach, my dear friend David. We have to ensure that this is a strong public relations campaign which involves our people, which goes back to schools now, which goes to villages, which goes to the hinterland, to ensure that our people are fully briefed. Because I see Venezuela acting in a very strong and unprecedented fashion, as I say again. And we seem to be lukewarm in either our response or our upfrontness in terms of dealing with the issue. So I think that is where we have some of the things we have not done. And I think that a good thing that we have done is to start the dialogue, start the discourse. But it has to go beyond that. It has to go with actionable engagement, action-oriented engagement.
I am going to pick your brains here on another area of politics. So you, of course, you're an expert in foreign relations, but you're a political scientist. To what extent, in a situation like this, in a country like Guyana, to what extent should the government cede some space to the official opposition in terms of fashioning a cross-party approach. And I'm mindful the reason I'm asking this question is because we know that we have always been taught that governments are there to govern. But I'm thinking about Britain, for example, during the Second World War, setting up a war government. And that model that when you are faced with external aggression, you drop some of the barriers to functional cooperation between government and opposition. To what extent something not necessarily a war government, but to what extent we need more of a more structured involvement of the opposition?
I would say that they should what might be termed a war room, a national war room, should be established, not only with elements from the opposition, but I know that there are professionals out there,
Yeah.
Guyanese, from with all kinds of expertise that can lend important experience and advice to fashion the responses and fashion policies that embrace both the diplomatic and the strategic elements of this issue that are, I think, needed at this time. So what we need to have, I think, is an embrace, a total national embrace at this point. Embrace in relation to grappling with the complex issues of this crisis, because I call it a crisis, which we face, an existential threat to our very national existence. And therefore, I feel that one has to look at, for government, opposition, civil society, and the kind of professional who can bring unbiased, strategic thinking to the table for us to have a structured grand strategy to deal not only with this issue, but the outcomes that become necessary. So,
No, continue. Finish.
no, please go ahead.
No. I love your idea of a war room, because there I was struggling with the whole notion of a war government, to know that that's not something that we're going to wrap our minds around tomorrow. But there you are. I mean, the idea of a war room that includes the government, the opposition, and of course they have the construct of the parliament in which to do that. So
Yes.
it's not something they invent. And to bring in other forces. And let me express my bias here, which I don't think you're going to disagree with. To bring in our thinkers. Now, there are experts like yourself and so on who have studied these issues over a period of time, know that part of the world in terms of the thinking of the leaders and so forth. I think our scholars at this time are most needed. I can think of no big development in world history in which top scholars have not been involved. And sometimes I feel that we in Guyana, because of the nature of our politics, have not made use of the scholars that we have in there. Somebody like Rex Netherford would say, "Oh my God, we have more scholars per square feet for our own good," right? And yet we don't. So I like the idea of the war room and the involvement, not just about government and opposition, because sometimes you may say, we put two of them in a room, you don't get much done. But if you flesh that out with other professionals and scholars and civil society, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yes, David. It is unfortunate that over the years, the governments of Guyana, past and present, have not utilized the kind of experience and expertise that is here and in the diaspora, who are willing to contribute, especially in situations such as this. And so I think this crisis, this existential threat, gives us the opportunity to engage with that kind of professional, that kind of scholar, that kind of person with thinking, former military, people who have studied geography, geopolitics, and that is unnecessary in the political sphere, but they're rather willing to make a contribution to this national effort. And I believe that if there's one thing that we could press for, is that kind of war room engagement, which should be yesterday. Because I don't think we have much time. As I said, I'm concerned when I saw that interview with that lady, the vice president of Venezuela, and when she also, I hope you will have the opportunity to look at it.
Yes, I'm going to, as soon as I finish this program, I'm going to go look at it.
She includes people from the Caribbean, Barbados, strategically, Belize, asking questions and making comments, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, so that they're targeting nation states to lend support. Now we have to be, very strong. We have to be upfront in countering that kind of fabricated claim by putting our position out there, argue for the rule of law to prevail, for the principles of international law to guide us, and issues such as those, or else we find ourselves lacking the kind of support that is needed. We need to go to the Vatican. We need to go to the African Union. We need to go to the BRICS. We need to go to the current chairman of CELAC, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. And you know who that is? A Caribbean leader, Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes.
He's the current chairman, the pro-temporal chairman. And I've heard of not a word from CELAC. And I'm not being political. I'm saying the reality is that we have an organization, 33 members from the hemisphere, that ought to be briefed on Guyana's position and for statements unequivocal to be made in relation to the issue, and we hear nothing. There's another organization called the ACS, the Association of Caribbean States, which came out of the West Indian Commission in 1995. It was established. The wise men of the Caribbean, all the countries washed by the Caribbean Sea and CARICOM were eligible for membership. And we hear not a word from the Association of Caribbean States.
And the English-speaking Caribbean has played an important role in that organization.
We were the founding thinkers.
Yeah,
it came out of the Time for Action, the report of the West Indian Commission in 1992, talking about widening and deepening the integration movement simultaneously, and that gave the embryonic movement.
Our own Trinidad Ramphel played
the Association of Caribbean States.
Yes, our own Trinidad Ramphel played a pivotal role in that process.
And I don't hear a word in relation. So my view is that we have these concentric circles of international relations. We need a structured, strategic, policy framework for which, or to the preparation of which could engage the same membership of the war room we talk about, so that we know if we were to develop the concept of the special envoy, we can give them that kind of document, that paper. And so everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. In wherever capital you have to go to ensure that our position is clearly articulated.
Yeah, a roving ambassador out there, going from Mark. Let us stay with CARICOM for a moment, because those are our quote-unquote natural allies, the members of CARICOM. But we know that countries in CARICOM benefited from Venezuelan largesse, and I'm talking about the Petro-Caribbean initiative that was started by Chavez. And so therefore, CARICOM issue is not a straightforward slam dunk issue. And I'm saying that in pursuit of your own plea tonight, that we must be in those capitals tomorrow, yesterday, and we must take nothing for granted. Speak a little bit about the nuance of CARICOM on this Venezuela-Guyana issue.
Interesting question, interesting perspective. You know, I believe that national interest sometimes trumps any other kind of engagement, and we see it in the context of the small states, especially those of the Eastern Caribbean. Dominica, St. Vincent, Antigua, Grenada, St. Lucia, and so on. We see a very narrow national interest perspective being shared. And I believe that the issue of dependency or dependence on the Petro-Caribbean, I mean, I even hear Barbados talking about the resurgence of Petro-Caribbean. And I was bold enough a few days ago to argue that we may want to re-engineer Petro-Caribbean. Let us look at the possibility of the new oil-producing states, right? Guyana, Suriname, soon to become one. We can look at the I call it the Guyana Shield corridor, and seek to embrace Brazil. And we can also think about enlarging it. There was the San Jose Accord of 1981 that had Mexico and Colombia, so that we can, in a sense, fashion a new Petro-Caribbean that does not have those states solely dependent
on Venezuela.
And because I think, I know, I have not seen as yet any one of those small states come individually and unequivocally support Guyana in this issue.
Yes, that's right. Worrying.
And
the CARICOM Secretariat has issued a statement.
And I listened to one of the leaders say that the CARICOM Secretariat.
Yes, she said that.
Statement.
Yes,
right. The CARICOM Secretariat as against CARICOM. But I don't want to bash CARICOM. I want to see the extent to which we can bring those on board, those who are wavering, by considering a changing Petro-Caribbean arrangement. Because we see small states, some of them, the populations are small, the needs are great. We can even have our experts consider looking at how Guyana could use some of the oil that is accrued to it.
Yeah.
And even re-engage the joint partners, the ExxonMobil and so on, to give or to sell some of their oil at concessionary prices to small states of the region, reworking the whole arrangement. Some people might argue that the bottom line for those states, for those corporations, is profit. But I think that we have enough skilled negotiators to look in the context, especially of the plights of post-COVID economies in the region. They haven't recovered. That we can look at some new strategic thinkers, new initiatives that could move Petro-Caribbean into a different type of mode and remove the dependence on one state, Venezuela, to a broadened engagement and a new Caribbean energy policy that could perhaps go beyond fossil fuel, that could look at the benefits of for example, ethanol. And Brazil is key in that regard.
Yeah.
You can look at solar. And so broaden the thinking on energy policy. We, grounded in this view that we have to move away from the dependence on one state for Petro-Caribbean.
Dr. Mark Kirton here tonight. I am certain that you all would agree with me. That's brought here some new perspectives on this issue that we are faced with. We have taken the position in this program that Venezuela is not a straightforward issue. This issue is much more complex. It has always been a complex issue, but it is now much more complex since we have become a petro state. It has made all our issues more complex than they were before we discovered oil. And so I'm very glad on your behalf to have Professor here. I didn't press him very much on what we may call the Burnham model of foreign policy and how relevant, because he laid it out, that whole model of foreign policy, and how we could utilize aspects of that model today, because of course nothing stays still in time. One of the only things that we are certain about as human beings is that tomorrow will be Saturday. We know that Friday will not be delayed for another 24 hours. Tomorrow is going to be Saturday. The change is the only thing that we are certain of. But I promise, Commissioner Cole, my sister, I promise that we will invite Professor back in the very near future, because we continue to cover this issue in a very, very intense way. As I said, this week we had Henry Jeffrey, we had Aubrey Norton, and now we have Professor Mark Kirton. We haven't tapped yet on Mr. Greenidge, who is front and center of this issue. But I promise you all that we're going to try to get him here. He's, of course, in great demand now, but we're going to continue to cover this issue. And as you can see, that the more we bring fresh and new faces to this issue, we get new perspectives on it. I like the idea of the war room. I like the idea of the war room as something that at least we can agree on, even in a contentious place like Guyana. Dr. Kirton, is there anything that you badly wanted to say that I didn't ask a question that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
Well, all I would like to do at this stage is to reiterate the need for this to be seen as a national issue, and that we all have to throw down our political gloves, and look at it in the context of a survival of a nation state. We have to look at it in the context of an existential threat. We have to ensure, I believe, an important component is keeping our people informed. And I think that is what has to be a critical element in the emergence of any kind of public relations and strategic thinking agenda. Additionally, I don't think we can look at a static kind of situation. It changes every day, as you quite rightly indicated. We have to broaden our alliance base. We have to ensure that we look at where are some of the gaps, how we can look at developing new alliances and new allies in this particular issue. Look where there are convergences of interests. For example, Colombia has a border issue with Venezuela, and I am not sure that we have engaged and tapped into that convergence at this stage. Just one example. So that I think that we need to ensure that at that level, the development of new allies, and even to look forward to ensuring that we might maybe develop a country support group, because that's popular. That has been done. I mean, we used to chair the Council for Namibia
Yes.
many decades ago,
Yes.
as they had these issues. we see where there was a support group for Haiti, so that we could look at countries that have, some similar interests, that have unequivocal support for our position, to form that kind of support alliance group. So we have a set of different levels of engagement. We have to look at also at potential military alliances. How strong we have a small army. We don't know what kind of engagement is going to be. We have to ensure that we have at least a deterrent force. Now, I might go even further and argue for a move to sensitize the United Nations Security Council very quickly, even before the 3rd of December, when it's going to be that referendum, to talk about this potential threat to our sovereignty. Let them know at least. And if one could think outside the box, look for some, I don't want to call it preventive, but some humanitarian military mission, multilateral, global in scope, that could add some deterrent impact to that potential aggression. So I mean, those things I think could be more discussed. Look at the potential challenges to that. Look at the opportunities for those in a war room. So this is why I think it is important for that set of thinkers to sit and let ideas contend, so to speak.
Thank you very much, my brother, and I will be calling on you again very, very, very shortly as this issue develops. We hope that this issue will not last, but we have to be realistic. As you said earlier in the program, the Venezuelan issue is really an existential threat to Guyana, and so it is not going to go away tomorrow. And there is a lot of work to be done. And often governments, by their very nature, are not institutions. The government is not an institution that will come out and say, we will do this progressive thing, we'll do that progressive thing. Often, the pressure on government to take progressive positions comes from our non-governmental institutions, from our scholars, from our civil society leaders, and leaders of our people's organizations. So we have work to do across the board, and we take responsibility on this program as a public entity that is engaged in what I loosely call public scholarship, because we are all scholars when it comes to certain national issues. And we intend to play our role at educating, sensitizing on this issue. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Kirton.
I appreciate your invitation, and thank you so very much.
Dr. Mark Kirton there, of course, former lecturer at the University of Guyana, was once the shortest serving vice chancellor of the University of Guyana. And then he spent a long time in Trinidad at the University of the West Indies, at the Institute of International Relations. As old people say in the village, he know what he talking about. He had just come on this thing. So his credentials speak for themselves. And so we were very, very glad to have him here tonight to really open up this issue in a way that we could be proud of as a Politics 101 family. It's the weekend, so you all stretch out a little bit, keep up on the news, remember what's happening there in the Gaza Strip there. The what Bob Marley says, man to man can be so unjust. I didn't get a chance to stitch that in with Dr. Kirton tonight, because there are always linkages on these things that are happening. He did begin the program by saying there are things that are happening globally that impacts even small countries like us. And we are no longer just a small country in terms of population, in terms of size, and so on. We may consider a small country. But as a petrol state, we are a big country. We are a big country. And here's our opportunity to lead ourselves. There are other issues as they relate to this Venezuela thing that we are going to tease out on this program. So stay tuned. Again, thank you all so much for staying with us another evening, another night. Burnham used to say, watch with me one more night, you know what I mean? And we have several nights. But we know the storm may be raging tonight, but as they say, the Christians, joy cometh in the morning. But we cannot wait for that joy to come. We have to do our work because God helps those who help themselves. Love you all.